All right, a little more insight. Let's go back to Hamburg and bring in USA Today White House correspondent Gregory Korte joins us from the G20 as well. Nice to see you, sir.
Good seeing you.
All right, so we've got a little bit of delay here to work with, understandably so. In so many of these G20 summits in the past, there was the United States president and there was everybody else that you looked to, and it was clear that he was not just first among equals, he was almost a first as the President of the United States. Did that hold true in this summit, or are we in a new era?
No, we certainly are in a new era, and this was unmistakably Angela Merkel's G20 summit. That, she's the German chancellor. Her profile has only risen in the Trump era. She's the host of this summit, so it's understandable that she would help to set the agenda. But she set that agenda around issues like climate change, or trade and migration, on issues that President Trump is divided with the rest of the developed world on, especially on the climate change issue.
All right, and give us a sense, were people sort of fairly dismissive of President Trump about that, or is there some kind of uniting among other G20 nations against the United States over the climate issue? Because so many in the United States kind of view it as a giant yawn, whereas in Europe, seems at least, they think it's enormously important.
Yeah, one of the other stories come out of the G20 today, and John Roberts didn't get into this before because there's so much other news to come out of the summit, but the G20 nations signed on to a communique, as they do at the end of every summit, and they included a passage on climate. The passage on climate was the only area of disagreement. 19 countries made a statement that the Paris Climate Agreement is irreversible. The United States was a lone holdout. The United States said, look, we have to have fossil fuels as part of the equation. It'll lead to economic growth. It's a very sort of, Trump-driven U.S. energy policy. But clearly the statement there was that the U.S. is going to go it alone. Merkel, for her part, said, look, we can't wait around for the U.S. It's important for these other 19 countries to get on record supporting the Paris Climate Agreement, and she ended up with basically a dissenting opinion from the United States in that communique, which is pretty unusual for a G20.
And Gregory, as you noted, so much of that news has been overshadowed by the news and the discussion of the meetings between President Trump and President Putin, between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart. This struck us, and this comes out of what John Roberts was saying. Hamburg, Germany, Associated Press. Putin says he thinks Trump believes his denial of Russia meddling in U.S. vote, but better to ask Trump himself. And then Eli Lake, a noted foreign policy expert and analyst here from Bloomberg in the United States, tweeted this. Hey, at POTUS. Noteworthy that in the past, the president has retweeted some of Eli's articles. This Putin guy is making you look like a chump. And that was just a couple of hours before the president heads back to the United States. Is there a feeling among the folks that you talk to, not just from the United States, but from other countries, that Putin got the upper hand here, or what's the ringside score from the G20?
Well, we still don't know exactly word for word what happened at that meeting, and we're going to hear, I think, more of the White House view from this. We've heard mostly from Putin and his foreign minister.
I got the spin, Gregory. What I'm interested in, sort of the general view there among the other delegations. We sort of started this with, is the U.S. president no longer king? Do they feel as though Putin outmaneuvered him a little bit here, at least in the early rounds?
Well, remember, one of the other things that come out of that meeting was an agreement on a Syrian ceasefire, and that's not nothing. So, Trump did get something out of here that he proved that a revamping of his relationship with Russia can yield some very specific foreign policy goals. But look, they made absolutely no progress on the issue of interference in United States elections. And remember, that's not just an issue for the United States. Russia has been accused of meddling in elections across Western Europe, most recently in the French presidential election. And yeah, there are a lot of other European leaders that would like to see a stronger United States response to Russian malicious cyber activity and the subversion of democracies in Western Europe. And to the extent that Trump did not get an admission from Putin that that was happening, but only a somewhat vague kind of agreement to work in the future to agree not to meddle in each other's elections, which, by the way, that feeds into the Putin narrative that he's not the only, that even though Russia, Putin says, didn't do this, even if it did, the West does this against Russia all the time too. So yeah, I don't think we've really made any progress on that. And so what we'll have to see is what comes of this agreement when it actually gets reduced to paper.
Well, and once it gets reduced to paper, if the Russians bother to go along with it, they don't exactly have a great track record in that sense. Gregory, appreciate your insights. As you noted, more spin from the White House as Air Force One makes the flight home. We're awaiting a gaggle that John Roberts talked about. So more news to come throughout the afternoon. Thank you, sir.